The last entry in that ledger is dated 11 days from now, and the name next to that date is mine. My name is Colton Weir. I photograph old records for a living, county death certificates, church burial logs, the kind of documents that sit in basements for 100 years before anyone looks at them again. I've never believed in anything supernatural. I still don't, technically. But I've spent the last year trying to understand how a 200-year-old parish register from Charleston can have entries written in pencil from last week, in handwriting that hasn't changed since 1832. I found the ledger in a climate-controlled room on Calhoun Street, the third volume in a set of 3. I was hired to digitize it. The first 2 volumes were normal. The third volume is why I'm recording this. I should back up properly now. I'm a freelance archival consultant. That means I spend my time in basements, courthouse annexes, church vaults, and the back rooms of historical societies across the Lowcountry. I've handled records so old the ink has turned the color of weak tea. I've read wills that made me angry. I've read burial logs that made me quiet. I've never read anything that made me want to leave the profession. Until March of last year. A woman named Della Voss hired me. She was the administrative director of a small preservation society in Charleston. Not one of the big ones, not the ones on walking tour brochures, private organization. They had a backlog of uncatalogued burial records from a defunct parish church, dissolved in the 1840s. Standard work. I drove down from Columbia on a Tuesday. The office was unremarkable, second floor of a converted Victorian on Calhoun Street. The workroom was a converted bedroom. No windows, a dehumidifier in the corner, a portable AC unit ducted through the wall, about 40 archival boxes on industrial shelving. I'd seen 100 rooms just like it. Della walked me through the priority items, bound registers, burial records, interment permits, sexton's logs. She showed me the digitization station, a copy stand with LED panels, a tethered camera, a laptop running capture software I'd used before. Everything was fine. I started with the first box. Inside were 3 leather-bound volumes. The first covered 1791 to 1803. The second, 1803 to 1819. The third was labeled on the spine, but the label had partially detached, so the dates were obscured. I photographed the first 2 volumes without issue. Each page held 8 to 12 handwritten lines. Name, date of death, date of interment, burial location. The handwriting changed every few years. Normal. Then I opened the third volume. The first 30 pages were consistent with the others. Same paper stock, same iron gall ink, same format. Entries ran from 1819 through 1831. Nothing unusual. Around page 34, I noticed a change. The entries continued past 1831, but the handwriting had shifted, not dramatically, but the strokes were lighter, the spacing irregular, and the ink was different. It was graphite, pencil. I leaned closer. The entries from 1832 onward were written in pencil, faint but legible, same format, and the dates kept going. 1833, 1838, 1841, 1847, 1853, 1860. Then I noticed something else. The handwriting. The same compressed left slanting hand. Continued without change. Same lowercase g descending below the line. Same idiosyncratic capital J with its unnecessary crossbar. 50 years. One hand. I told myself there was an explanation. Maybe a long-lived sexton. But I've seen the handwriting of people who kept journals for 40 years. It always changes. This didn't. I turned to the back of the volume. The pages toward the end were fresher. Not yellowed, not foxed, the pencil dark and sharp. The last entries were dated 2024. I put the volume down. Sat in that room for 10 minutes without moving. The dehumidifier hummed. The AC cycled. Traffic on Calhoun Street muffled through the wall. Then I picked it back up and turned to the last written page. The final entry read, March 22, 2024, Margaret Leona Voss, Magnolia Cemetery, Section F, Lot 217. The date was 6 days ago. What I felt in that moment wasn't fear. It was professional vertigo. The sensation of looking at physical evidence that violates your understanding of how physical evidence works. The paper was original. The binding was original. The thread was period correct. I'd handled hundreds of volumes like this. I knew this was an authentic 18th century register. But the last entry in it was less than a week old. I photographed the page, closed the volume, returned it to its box, left the building, set the alarm, locked the door, drove back to my hotel on King Street, and sat on the bed, looking at the photographs on my camera's LCD screen. I should have called Della that night. Instead, I looked up Margaret Leona Voss. The obituary was in the Post and Courier, published March 23, 2024, age 81, longtime resident of West Ashley, services at Magnolia Cemetery, Section F. Everything matched. I didn't sleep well. In the morning, I went back to the office and went directly to the third volume. I began working backward from the most recent entry, photographing and transcribing each one. The pencil entries ran from page 34 to page 191, about 157 pages, spanning 1832 to March 2024. Same handwriting throughout. The pencil varied in darkness, but the graphite was consistent. No ballpoint, no felt tip. Traditional wood-cased pencil, unusually fine point. I cross-referenced names and dates. I started with the most recent entries and worked backward, checking each name against obituaries, cemetery records, and the Charleston County Death Index. Of the first 20 entries I checked, all dated between 2020 and 2024. 18 matched exactly. Name, date, cemetery, section, lot. The two I couldn't verify weren't contradicted. I just couldn't find records. Then I checked entries from the 1990s. Same accuracy. The 1970s. Same. I spent days at the Charleston County Public Library and the South Carolina room. Every entry I could verify was correct. Not approximately. Exactly. By the end of the week, I had verified 63 entries across nearly 200 years. All of them accurate down to lot numbers I could only confirm through cemetery plat maps that hadn't been digitized. I hadn't told Della. Part of me wanted to be thorough. Part of me was aware that showing someone else would change the nature of what was happening. As long as I was the only witness, the ledger was a problem I could investigate. The moment I told someone, it would become a situation. And situations get flattened by easy explanations. Someone would say hoax. Someone would say tampering. And those explanations would have been easier to live with than what I was beginning to suspect. On Friday, I brought in a portable USB microscope, the kind conservators use for paper analysis. I examined the pencil entries at 40 times magnification. The graphite had been applied directly to the original paper, not on inserted pages, not on patches. The pencil mark sat in the fiber of the paper. On the older entries, the graphite had partially absorbed into the cellulose, a process that takes decades, You can't fake that. You can artificially age ink. You can't artificially age graphite absorption into 200-year-old paper. The entries from the 1830s showed deep absorption. The entries from the 2020s showed surface-level graphite. The gradient was smooth and continuous. This meant one of two things. Either someone had been adding entries to this volume continuously since 1832. Same handwriting, same pencil, perfect accuracy. Or the physical evidence was impossible. I called Della on Saturday, told her I'd found something unusual, asked if she could meet me at the office. She said she could come Monday. I asked if she could come sooner. She paused. Then she said, "The last consultant who opened that volume stopped returning my calls. Then he stopped answering his door. Then his wife called me. I'll be there Monday." That was the first time I heard the name Henry Gatch. I spent the weekend in my hotel room reviewing my photographs. I organized the data chronologically, looked for patterns. Every entry corresponded to a death in the Charleston area. Not the greater Low Country, but the historic urban core. The burials were spread across multiple cemeteries: Magnolia, St. Lawrence, Bethany, the old circular church cemetery. But the deaths were all within the original city limits as they existed in the early 19th century. More unsettling was the distribution. Some years had 15 or 20 entries. Some had only 2 or 3. But the years with more entries didn't line up with epidemic years or disasters. 1854, a yellow fever year, had 11 entries, well below the actual death toll. 1886, the earthquake, had only 4. Meanwhile, 1923, a quiet year, had 19. I mapped the entries using cemetery and lot information. The burials clustered slightly in certain areas, the peninsula, the old wards, and the lot assignments were correct not just for the general section, but for the specific plot, the specific grave. In some cases, these were lots that hadn't been assigned until years after the person had died. The ledger recorded the final resting place before it existed. That detail is the one I keep coming back to. A record accurate about dates and names is remarkable, but not inexplicable. Someone with access to death certificates could compile that. But a record that accurately logs lot assignments before those assignments were made? That's not compilation. That's something else. I didn't have a word for what it was. I still don't. Monday came. Della met me at the office at 9. She was a small woman, mid-60s, reading glasses on a beaded chain. She listened to me describe what I'd found without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I was hoping you wouldn't open the 3rd volume." I asked her what she meant. She said the 3rd volume had been flagged as restricted condition concerns in their internal catalog. Henry Gatch, the previous archival consultant who did an initial survey in 2019, had left a note recommending it be kept separate. She said Gatch hadn't explained why in his written report. He just marked it restricted and moved on. I asked if she'd read the volume herself. She said she had not. She said she'd been told when she took the position in 2021 that the 3rd volume was fragile and should not be handled except by a conservator. The person who told her that was the trust's executor, a man named Ellis Broughton. She described him as very specific about certain things. I asked if I could speak with Broughton. Della hesitated. Then she said that Broughton had passed away in January. I checked the ledger that afternoon. Ellis Broughton, January 14th, 2024, Magnolia Cemetery, Section C, Lot 88. I looked at Della. She didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't tell her. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued my contracted work on the other volumes during the day and returned to the third volume after hours. I began researching the provenance of the collection. The Society's records were limited. The collection had come into their custody in 1971, donated by a law firm liquidating the estate of a client. The family name was Harlow. The Harlows were not one of Charleston's famous families, but they were Old Charleston, present since the colonial period, involved in modest trade and real estate. The last Harlow to live in Charleston was a man named Clement Harlow, who died in 1970 without direct descendants. Clement Harlow had been the sexton of the parish, whose records I was cataloging. He held that position from 1934 until the parish was dissolved in 1962. Before him, his father, also named Clement, had been sexton from 1898 to 1934. Before that, his grandfather, Thomas Harlow, from 1861 to 1898. I traced the line back. The Harlow family had provided the sexton for this parish, and later maintained its burial records after the parish ceased to function, in an unbroken line going back to at least the 1790s. The handwriting in the first 2 volumes matched multiple individuals, different clerks, different hands. But the pencil entries in the 3rd volume, the ones that began in 1832, were in a single hand, one hand, nearly 200 years, through a family line that served the same function for the same dead for 7 or 8 generations. I'm not claiming one person lived for 200 years. I'm saying the handwriting does not change, and handwriting, like fingerprints, is individual. Children do not write like their parents. Apprentices do not write like their masters. Even deliberate forgery introduces micro-variations. I found no variations. I contacted a forensic document examiner in Columbia, a woman I'd worked with before, Dr. Rana Atchison. I sent her high-resolution photographs of pencil entries spanning 1832, 1877, 1923, 1961, and 2020. No context, just asked whether they were written by the same individual. Her report came back in 9 days. Her conclusion was unambiguous. All 5 samples were produced by the same hand, with a confidence level she described as unusually high. She flagged the lowercase g, the capital J, and the numeral 7, all highly individual and perfectly consistent. She asked where the samples came from. I told her the date range. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's not possible." I said I knew. She asked if I was sure the samples weren't from a single period, someone sitting down and backdating entries. I told her about the graphite absorption gradient. She was quiet again. Then she said, "I'd want to see the original." I couldn't arrange that because the following week the 3rd volume went missing. I arrived at the office on a Wednesday morning. The box that held the 3rd volume was empty. The other 2 volumes were untouched. No signs of forced entry. The alarm log showed no unauthorized access. Della's code and mine were the only ones in the system. Della said she hadn't touched it. I believed her. We checked the security camera. A cheap consumer model in the hallway. The footage from the previous night showed nothing. The hallway was empty from the time I'd left at 7:40 p.m. until Della arrived at 8:15 a.m. Nobody entered the room. But when I reviewed the footage frame by frame, I noticed something. At 3:17 a.m., a single frame, 1/24th of a second, showed the door to the records room open. The frame before, closed. The frame after, closed. One frame. I showed Della. She stared at it for a long time. Then she said the camera might be malfunctioning. I took a copy of the footage on a flash drive. I still have it. Without the original volume, I had only my photographs and transcriptions. I went through them again, entry by entry. And I found something I hadn't noticed before. Not every entry recorded a death that had already happened. Most did. But scattered throughout the ledger, at irregular intervals, there were entries where the interment date preceded the death date, sometimes by days, sometimes by months. The death dates in those entries corresponded to actual deaths, which meant the person was recorded as buried before they died. Or, the interpretation I couldn't shake, the entry was written before the person died, written in advance, as a forecast. There were 14 such entries across nearly 200 years. I verified 3 of them. The first was a man named George Priolo, listed with a death date of September 17, 1938, and an interment date of September 12, 1938. He died on September 17th. His actual burial was September 19th. The ledger had the burial location correct. The second was a woman named Ruth Canty, death date April 3rd, 1971, interment date March 28th, 1971. She died on April 3rd, buried April 5th, lot number correct. The third was a child. I'm not including the name. Death date November 2nd, 2009. Interment date October 22nd, 2009. The child died on November 2nd. Burial location correct. In each case, the ledger entry was written before the person died, and the burial location, including the specific lot, was correct. I sat with this for days, felt something I rarely feel in my profession, the sense that a document is not passive, that it is not simply a record of things that happened, that it is, in some way I lack the vocabulary for, involved. After the volume disappeared, I tried to find Henry Gatch, the previous consultant who had flagged the third volume as restricted. Della gave me his contact information, email and phone. The email bounced. The phone was disconnected. His professional website was down. His LinkedIn was deleted. I tried the College of Charleston, where he'd done his graduate work. The department administrator told me Gatch had been an adjunct instructor there until 2020. He resigned without notice midway through a semester. The department had been unable to reach him. His emergency contact, his mother, had reported that she hadn't heard from him in months. I asked when his mother had reported this. Late 2020, the administrator said. Around October. Was there a missing persons report? I believe so, but I don't know what came of it. I looked up missing person records for Henry Allen Gatch. The report was filed on October 31st, 2020, by his mother in Columbia. As of my search, April 2024, the case was still open. He had never been found. I went back to my transcription of the ledger. Henry Allen Gatch, December 8th, 2020, Unitarian Church Cemetery, Plot 14. The interment date was listed as November 29th, 2020. I drove to the Unitarian Church Cemetery the next morning. It's one of the oldest in Charleston, shaded by enormous live oaks. I found Plot 14. There was a grave there. Old 18th century, the stone so worn I could barely make out the name. Someone who had been dead for over 200 years. But the ground at the base of the stone had been disturbed. Not freshly. The grass had regrown, but the soil level was slightly uneven, the turf a different shade of green. The kind of subtle inconsistency you'd only notice if you were looking, which I was. I didn't dig. I want to be clear about that. I didn't dig, and I haven't dug, and I won't. But I sat there on the grass beside a grave that was supposedly occupied by a man who died in 1783, and I thought about Henry Gatch, who had opened the same volume I had opened, who had disappeared 7 months later, whose name appeared in the same pencil, in the same handwriting, with a burial location I was now sitting on top of. I drove back to Columbia that afternoon. I didn't go back to the Calhoun Street office. I emailed Della and told her I was pausing the project due to a personal matter. She didn't reply. For the next 2 months, I didn't touch the transcriptions. I put the flash drives in a drawer. I took other contracts. I tried to let it go. I couldn't. In June, I received a package at my home address, no return label, no postage, just my name and address handwritten on a manila envelope. The handwriting was the same compressed left slanting hand from the ledger. Inside was a single sheet of modern paper. On it, in pencil, in that same handwriting, were 7 names and dates, all future dates. The earliest was August 2024. The latest was March 2025. I put the paper down and walked outside. Stood in my driveway for a long time. When I went back inside, I photographed the sheet, sealed it in an acid-free sleeve, and locked it in my filing cabinet. Then I began checking the names. The first name was Donald Ray Patterson. Date of death, August 11th, 2024. I found him in the white pages. A retired electrician in North Charleston. On August 11th, I checked the obituaries. Donald Ray Patterson, age 73, died August 11th, 2024. Cemetery and lot matched the sheet. The second name, the third, the fourth. Each one died on the date listed. Each was buried in the location specified. I stopped checking after the fifth, not because I doubted the pattern, because the act of checking, looking up a living person's name, knowing they were going to die on a specific date, and then confirming it afterward, was doing something to me that I don't have clinical language for. Not guilt, not grief, something like complicity, like the knowledge itself was a form of participation. In October, I received another envelope. Same handwriting, same method. This one contained a single sheet with 4 names and dates, ranging from November 2024 to February 2025. And below the last name, 2 words. Continue the work. I stared at that note for a very long time. The Harlows had continued the work for generations. One family, one function, one unbroken line of service to the dead of Charleston. Now the last Harlow was gone. Henry Gatch had opened the ledger and vanished. I had opened the ledger, and the ledger had come to me. I don't believe in supernatural inheritance. I don't believe in curses. I am a man who has spent his career handling old paper, and I trust what paper tells me. This paper was telling me something I could not reconcile with any framework I possessed. On that same sheet, next to the third name, I noticed a small symbol I hadn't seen before. A tiny X in the margin, drawn in the same pencil. I went back through my transcriptions. The X appeared exactly 7 times across the entire ledger. I checked each entry. Every single one had been erased and rewritten. Every single one originally contained a Harlow name that had been replaced with someone else's. The X marked the substitutions, the ones where a Harlow lived and another died. I sat with that for a while, too. In November, I drove back to Charleston, not to the Calhoun Street office. I went to the Harlow family plot at Magnolia Cemetery. It took me 2 hours to find it. a small section near the western wall, overgrown, marked by a single obelisk, tilted about 15 degrees. The inscriptions listed 7 generations of Harlows, the most recent, Clement Harlow, 1898 to 1970. At the base of the obelisk, half buried in leaf litter and soil, I found a tin box, the kind you might store fishing lures in, corroded but intact. Inside was a pencil, a simple wooden pencil, hexagonal, painted dark green, no manufacturer's marking, sharpened many times, down to about 4 inches. The graphite point was fine and sharp. I held it up next to the photographs on my phone. The width of the point was consistent with the pencil strokes in the ledger. I can't prove a connection, but I felt one. I felt it in the weight of the pencil, which was wrong. Too heavy for its size, as if the wood were denser than it should be, and I felt it in the way my hand closed around it, which was automatic, the way your hand closes around a tool you've used before. I put the pencil back in the tin, put the tin back where I found it. Then I drove to the Charleston County Library and spent 3 days researching the Harlow family. What I found was fragmentary but consistent. The Harlows had been associated with burial duties in Charleston since the late 18th century. References in church records, vestry minutes, municipal correspondence, and at least one court proceeding from 1847 in which a Thomas Harlow testified as the keeper of the parish register of the dead. The court record described his duty as the maintenance of a continuous ledger of all interments within the bounds of the old parish, to be kept in the manner prescribed by his predecessors. The manner prescribed by his predecessors. I found one other reference, a letter dated 1819 from the Reverend James Caldwell, the last rector of the parish before its decline, written to the Bishop of South Carolina. The letter was brief and evasive, but it included this passage. The family maintains a practice of long standing, the precise origins of which are not known to me, whereby the ledger of interments is kept by means of a lead point rather than ink, on the understanding that what is written in lead may be unwritten, and what is unwritten may yet be changed. I have counseled against this superstition, but the family is resolute, and as the practice harms no one, and the records are maintained with accuracy, I have chosen not to press the matter. What is written in lead may be unwritten. What is unwritten may yet be changed. I read that passage in the South Carolina Historical Society reading room, and I stopped breathing for a moment. Not from fear, from recognition. Reverend Caldwell had known. He had known exactly what the pencil was for, and he had written it down anyway, and then he had done nothing. The implication was clear, even if he didn't fully understand it himself. The Harlows didn't use pencil because they couldn't afford ink. They used pencil because pencil is erasable, because a record made in pencil is mutable. A name can be removed. A date can be shifted. A death can be what? Postponed, redirected, undone. I went back through my transcriptions looking for evidence of erasure. I found 11 instances of clear erasure and rewriting. In 3 cases, using raking light, I partially reconstructed the original entries. In one, an entry from 1927, the original name had been James Harlow. Date of death, June 4th, 1927. The name had been erased and replaced with Walter Pinckney. Walter Pinckney died on June 4th, 1927. Buried at Bethany Cemetery. James Harlow. I found him in census records. Was born in 1892 and died in 1949. He did not die in 1927. The ledger had originally recorded James Harlow's death. Someone erased his name and wrote in Walter Pinkney instead. James Harlow lived another 22 years. I found 2 other similar cases. In each, a Harlow name had been erased and replaced. In each, the Harlow lived. The replacement died. I need to stop here and acknowledge what I'm describing. A document that records deaths before they happen, maintained by a family that used pencil specifically because pencil can be erased. A family that periodically erased their own names and substituted other people's names instead. I don't know if the ledger caused the deaths or merely predicted them. I know only that the correlation is perfect across every entry I've been able to verify. That the Harlow family survived in Charleston for over 2 centuries while serving as the custodians of this document. That the document is now without a custodian, and that it has, apparently, selected me. In December, I received a 3rd envelope. This one contained a longer list. 12 names stretching from January to October 2025. And below the list, a second note. The pencil is where you left it. I haven't gone back for it. On January 6th, 2025, a man named Robert Sims died in Charleston. Heart failure. His name was on the December list. Death date and burial information matched exactly. On that same day, I received a phone call from Della Voss. She told me the office on Calhoun Street had been broken into. Nothing was taken. But every surface in the records room, the shelving, the table, the walls, the ceiling, had been covered in pencil writing, names and dates, hundreds of them. Written in a hand she described as very neat, very old-fashioned. She said the writing extended onto the floor, the inside of the door, and the surfaces of the archival boxes. She said the writing was not angry, her word, but steady, like someone doing a job. She asked if I knew anything about it. I said I didn't. That was a lie, and I think she knew it. The next day, she emailed me 2 photographs. I enlarged them on my laptop. Hundreds of burial entries, covering what appeared to be years' worth of future deaths, all in the same pencil, all in the same hand, near the bottom of one wall, partially obscured by a shelving unit. There was a single underlined entry, the only underlined entry in the entire room. My name, and a date, 11 days from today. I don't know what happens if I pick up the pencil, if picking it up means accepting the role, becoming the next keeper, maintaining the ledger, living within its logic. I don't know if writing in the ledger seals the deaths, or if the deaths are already sealed and the ledger merely records them and the keeper merely witnesses. I don't know if the Harlows were murderers or clerks or something in between. What I know is this: the ledger is real. The deaths are real. The pencil is waiting at Magnolia Cemetery in a tin box at the base of a tilted obelisk. My name is on the wall of a room on Calhoun Street, underlined with a date that is 11 days from now. I have not gone back to Charleston. I have not picked up the pencil. I am sitting in my apartment in Columbia. It is very quiet. I have been staring at the photographs on my laptop for 6 hours, and I have been thinking about what Reverend Caldwell wrote in 1819. What is written in lead may be unwritten. The pencil is where I left it. The entry has my name. The entry is in pencil. Pencil can be erased, but I would need the pencil to erase it. And if I pick up the pencil, I don't know what I become. I think the Harlows knew. I think that's why the handwriting never changed. I think whoever holds the pencil isn't the same person afterward. The pencil is the hand, and the hand is the ledger, and the ledger is the record of the dead, And the record of the dead does not stop because records do not stop. Someone has to maintain them. Someone always has to maintain them. The last Harlow died in 1970. Henry Gatch opened the ledger in 2019 and disappeared in 2020. His name is in the book. He didn't take the pencil. I opened the ledger in 2024. My name is on the wall. I haven't taken the pencil. 11 days. On the sheet I received in October, the one that said, "Continue the work," there were 4 names. I verified 3. The deaths matched. But the 4th name, the last one with the latest date, was not a name I recognized. It was Della Voss. February 19th, 2025. I could have warned her. I could have called and said, "What? Don't die on February 19th. What would that have accomplished?" Or I could have driven to Charleston and picked up the pencil and erased her name and written someone else's. That's the choice. That's what the ledger offers, not the power to stop death, the power to redirect it, the power to choose. And the cost of choosing is becoming the person who chooses forever in the same handwriting, because the hand that holds the pencil is the hand that has always held the pencil. Della Voss died on February 19th, 2025. I read it in the Post and Courier. She was 67, cause of death, pulmonary embolism, buried at St. Lawrence Cemetery. I checked my transcription. The lot number matched. I'm recording this because I don't think I'll be recording anything else. The date on the wall is 11 days from now. I've made my decision. It's the same decision Henry Gatch made, not to pick up the pencil, to let the entry stand, to accept what was written rather than become the thing that writes. But I want someone to know about the ledger, that it's been active for over 200 years, that it records the dead of Charleston before they die, that it's maintained by a keeper who writes in pencil because pencil is mutable, and that the position of keeper is currently vacant. Because the thing that frightens me most, more than my own name on the wall, more than the date, more than the arithmetic of my remaining days, is this. If no one keeps the ledger keeps itself. And a ledger that keeps itself cannot erase. The names and dates that Della found on the walls of that room, the hundreds of future entries, written without a keeper, written by the ledger itself, those names are fixed. Those entries are in pencil, but there is no hand to erase them, no one to substitute. No one to look at a name and decide that this person should live a little longer and that stranger should take their place. Without a keeper, everyone on the wall dies on schedule. Every single one. I've made my peace with being on that wall, but someone will find this account. Someone will be curious the way I was curious. They'll go to Charleston. They'll find the Western Wall and the tilted obelisk and the corroded tin. And they'll pick up the pencil, and the handwriting won't change.